My name is Kirk. I am 59 years old. Last Saturday evening, I sat at my kitchen table while my daughter Brenda brought me a bowl of her homemade chicken soup. What she did not know was that I could see her reflection in the glass cabinet door. I watched her reach into her pocket, pull out a small packet, and sprinkle something into my bowl. When she turned away, I switched our plates. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about my own child. If you have ever trusted someone completely only to discover they were hiding something dark, let me know in the comments below. Before I tell you what happened next, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments. This story changed everything I thought I knew about my own family, and I believe it will change how you see yours too. I need to take you back to the beginning to help you understand how we got to that terrible night with the soup. My story really starts back in 1986 at a county fair in Knoxville, Tennessee. That was the year I met Margaret, the woman who would become my wife and the mother of my only child. I was 24 years old, working as a carpenter, specializing in custom furniture. I had my own small workshop back then. Nothing fancy, just a converted garage where I spent my days turning raw wood into tables, chairs, and cabinets. I loved the smell of sawdust, the feel of sandpaper against grain, the satisfaction of creating something beautiful with my own two hands. Margaret was working at a bake sale booth that day, selling homemade apple pies to raise money for the local elementary school where she worked as a nurse. She had this warm smile that lit up her whole face, and when she handed me a slice of pie, our fingers touched for just a moment. I knew right then that I wanted to see her again. We started dating that summer. Margaret was everything I had ever wanted in a partner. She was kind, patient, and had this gentle way of making everyone around her feel loved and valued. She would visit my workshop after her shifts at the school, sitting on an old stool while I worked, telling me about the children she had helped that day. I would listen and nod, sneaking glances at her whenever I thought she was not looking. We got married in the spring of 1987. It was a small ceremony at the local church with maybe 40 people in attendance. Margaret wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her slender frame, and I wore a suit I had borrowed from my older brother. We did not have much money, but we had each other, and back then that felt like more than enough. Our first home was a modest 2-bedroom house on the outskirts of town. I had found the property cheap because it needed so much work. The roof leaked, the plumbing was ancient, and the kitchen was barely functional. But Margaret and I spent our evenings and weekends fixing it up together. I handled the construction while she chose paint colors and curtains. Slowly, that run-down house became our home. 4 years later, in 1991, Brenda was born. I remember the day Margaret told me she was pregnant. I was in my workshop covered in wood shavings when she came in with this nervous smile on her face. She handed me a tiny pair of knitted booties, and it took me a moment to understand what she was telling me. When I finally got it, I swept her up in my arms and spun her around, not caring about the sawdust getting all over her dress. Brenda came into the world on a rainy October morning, screaming at the top of her lungs. She was perfect with Margaret's brown eyes and my stubborn chin. From the moment I held her in my arms, I knew I would do anything to protect her, to give her a good life, to make sure she never wanted for anything. Those early years were some of the happiest of my life. Margaret continued working at the school, though she cut back her hours to spend more time with Brenda. I expanded my furniture business, taking on bigger projects, building a reputation for quality craftsmanship. We were not wealthy, but we were comfortable, and more importantly, we were happy. I taught Brenda to work with wood when she was just 5 years old. She would stand on a little stool next to my workbench, watching intently as I demonstrated how to sand a piece of oak or apply a coat of varnish. Her small hands would try to mimic my movements, and I would guide her patiently, praising her efforts, even when the results were far from perfect. Those afternoons in my workshop are some of my most treasured memories. Margaret taught Brenda how to cook and bake. Every Sunday afternoon, the two of them would take over the kitchen, filling our home with the aroma of fresh bread, roasted chicken, and the chicken soup that would become a family tradition. Brenda loved helping her mother, stirring pots and measuring ingredients with serious concentration. Margaret would tell me later how Brenda had done most of the work herself, and I would make a big show of praising my daughter's culinary skills. We were a close family. Every evening we ate dinner together at the kitchen table, sharing stories about our days. Weekends were for family activities, whether that meant hiking in the nearby mountains, attending church on Sundays, or simply sitting on the porch watching fireflies dance in the summer twilight. Brenda would often say that when she grew up, she wanted to take care of us the way we took care of her. Those words meant everything to me. As Brenda grew older, she continued to excel. She was a bright student, always near the top of her class, and she had a natural charm that made her popular with teachers and classmates alike. Margaret and I attended every school play, every awards ceremony, every parent-teacher conference, bursting with pride at the young woman our daughter was becoming. But somewhere along the way, things began to change. It happened so gradually that I did not notice at first. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs that I missed the small shifts in Brenda's behavior that should have told me something was wrong. It started when Brenda went off to college. She chose a university about 3 hours away, majoring in business administration. We missed her terribly, but we were proud of her independence, her ambition. She came home for holidays and summer breaks, and those visits were always filled with joy and laughter. Then she met Nathan. Brenda introduced us to Nathan during her senior year of college. He was a year older than her, already working at a regional bank, with plans to climb the corporate ladder. He was polite enough when he came to our home, shaking my hand firmly and complimenting Margaret's cooking. But there was something about him that I could not quite put my finger on, a coldness behind his friendly smile that made me uneasy. Margaret noticed it too. After Nathan left that first evening, she turned to me and said that she hoped Brenda knew what she was doing. I agreed, but neither of us said anything to our daughter. We did not want to interfere, did not want to be those parents who tried to control their adult child's choices. Brenda graduated in 2013 and moved in with Nathan shortly after. They got engaged the following year and married in 2016 at a fancy venue that Nathan's family paid for. It was a beautiful wedding, much larger and more elaborate than the simple ceremony Margaret and I had shared. I walked my daughter down the aisle with tears in my eyes, hoping that she would find the same happiness in her marriage that I had found in mine. But almost immediately after the wedding, Brenda began to change. She visited less frequently, always citing work obligations or social commitments. When she did come home, Nathan was usually with her, and their conversations seemed to revolve around money, careers, and material possessions. The warmth that had once defined my daughter seemed to be fading, replaced by something harder, more calculating. Nathan had a way of steering conversations toward financial topics. He would casually ask about our retirement savings, the value of our property, whether we had made any investments. At first, I thought he was just making small talk, trying to connect with his father-in-law. But the questions became more pointed over time, more specific. He wanted to know about our life insurance policies, our wills, our plans for the future. Margaret grew ill in 2018. Breast cancer, the doctors said, already advanced by the time they found it. We began a grueling routine of chemotherapy, radiation, and hospital visits. Brenda came home more often during that time, but her visits felt perfunctory, rushed. She would check on her mother, ask a few questions, then disappear to take phone calls or respond to emails. Nathan rarely accompanied her, claiming he could not take time off work. Margaret passed away in March of 2019 after a year-long battle that left her frail and exhausted. I held her hand as she took her last breath, whispering words of love and gratitude for the 32 years we had shared. Losing her was like losing a part of myself, and for a long time afterward, I felt like I was just going through the motions of living. Brenda came to the funeral, of course, and she cried, but even her grief seemed distant, somehow controlled. Nathan stood beside her with that same cold smile, and I caught him looking around our house with an appraising eye, as if calculating its value. The thought made me sick, but I pushed it aside, telling myself I was being unfair, that grief was making me paranoid. After Margaret's death, I found myself alone in our house for the first time in over 3 decades. The silence was overwhelming. Every room held memories of my wife, of our life together, of the family we had built. I considered selling the place, moving somewhere smaller, but I could not bring myself to leave. This was where Margaret and I had raised our daughter. This was where we had been happy. Brenda suggested that I sell the house and move into an assisted living facility. She said it would be easier for me, that I would have people to look after me, activities to keep me busy. But I knew what she really meant. She wanted me out of the house so she could sell it, pocket the money, move on with her life without having to worry about her aging father. I refused. I told her I was perfectly capable of taking care of myself, that I had no intention of leaving the home I had built with my own hands. Brenda seemed disappointed by my decision, and Nathan did not even try to hide his frustration. They left that day with barely a goodbye, and for months afterward, I heard from my daughter only through occasional text messages. During that difficult time, I decided to put my affairs in order. I met with a lawyer and drafted a will, leaving everything to Brenda. The house, which sat on a large lot in a neighborhood that had become increasingly desirable, was worth approximately $450,000. Margaret's life insurance had left me with $180,000 in savings. There was also my own life insurance policy worth $300,000, with Brenda named as the sole beneficiary. I did not tell Brenda about the specifics of the will, but I mentioned to her that I had taken care of everything that she would be provided for after I was gone. I thought this would give her peace of mind, would reassure her that her father had thought about her future. Looking back, I realized that I was just giving her another reason to want me dead. About 3 months before the incident with the soup, something strange happened. Brenda called me out of the blue, her voice warm and cheerful in a way I had not heard in years. She said she had been doing a lot of thinking, that she realized she had not been a good daughter since her mother's death, and that she wanted to make things right. I was touched. I had been so lonely since Margaret passed, and the prospect of reconnecting with my daughter filled me with hope. I told her that I understood that grief affects everyone differently, that I was just glad to hear from her. We talked for nearly an hour that first call, catching up on each other's lives, sharing memories of Margaret. By the time we hung up, I felt like maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. Brenda started coming to visit every week after that. She would drive down on Saturday afternoons, spend a few hours with me, cook dinner, and then head home. At first, Nathan came with her, but after a few weeks she started coming alone, saying that Nathan had work obligations or golf outings. I did not mind. In fact, I preferred having my daughter to myself. She would cook for me, always insisting that I just sit and relax while she worked in the kitchen. She made all my favorite dishes that Margaret used to prepare, including the chicken soup that had been a Sunday tradition in our family. I was moved by her efforts, grateful for her attention. It felt like I had my little girl back. But there were things that should have made me suspicious of questions, that should have raised red flags. Brenda seemed unusually interested in my health. She would ask detailed questions about my medications, my doctor's appointments, any symptoms I might be experiencing. At the time, I thought she was just being a concerned daughter. Now, I know she was gathering information for a very different purpose. Nathan also showed renewed interest in my finances. During one of his rare visits, he asked if I had updated my will since Margaret's death, if I had considered adding him as a co-beneficiary. I told him that the will named Brenda as sole heir, and that I saw no reason to change it. He nodded, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. He wanted his name on those documents. He wanted a direct claim to my estate. Around this time, I started feeling unwell. It began with mild symptoms, things I initially attributed to age or stress. I would feel tired in the afternoons, sometimes dizzy when I stood up too quickly. There were headaches that came and went, bouts of nausea that seemed to have no cause. I mentioned these symptoms to Dr. Hendricks during a routine checkup, but my blood work came back normal. He said it was probably stress. Suggested I take it easy, maybe get more sleep. But the symptoms did not improve. If anything, they got worse. My hands began to tremble slightly, especially in the mornings. I had trouble concentrating sometimes, forgetting what I was doing in the middle of a task. I started to wonder if something was seriously wrong with me, if maybe this was the beginning of the end. The only pattern I could identify was that I felt worse after Brenda's visits, but I dismissed that connection as coincidence. My daughter loved me. She was trying to take care of me. There was no way her presence could be making me sick. It was my neighbor Walter who first put the idea in my head. Walter is 72 years old, a retired mechanic who has lived next door to me for over 30 years. We have been friends since Margaret and I first moved into the neighborhood, sharing beers on summer evenings and helping each other with yard work. He knows me better than almost anyone. One afternoon, Walter came over to return a tool he had borrowed. I was sitting on the porch feeling dizzy and weak after one of Brenda's visits the day before. He took one look at me and frowned. He said I did not look good. He said I had been getting worse over the past few months, ever since my daughter started coming around more often. He said he found it strange that the more she visited, the sicker I seemed to get. I told him he was being ridiculous, that Brenda was trying to help me, that her visits were the highlight of my week. But Walter shook his head. He told me about his own wife, God rest her soul, and how her daughter-in-law had treated her badly in her final years, all because of money and inheritance. He said sometimes the people closest to us are capable of things we never imagined. I dismissed his concerns, but his words stayed with me. They planted a seed of doubt that I could not quite shake. I started paying closer attention to Brenda when she visited, watching her movements more carefully, listening to her questions with new ears. And then came the Saturday that changed everything. It was a cool evening in late October, almost exactly 5 years after Margaret's death. Brenda had arrived around 4 in the afternoon, carrying grocery bags filled with ingredients for chicken soup. She said she knew it was my favorite, that she wanted to make it just like Mom used to. I sat at the kitchen table while she worked, watching her chop vegetables and simmer the broth. We talked about ordinary things, her job, the weather, memories of her mother. Everything seemed normal, comfortable even. I had almost forgotten Walter's warning, almost convinced myself that my suspicions were unfounded. Then Brenda announced that the soup was ready. She ladled it into 2 bowls and carried them toward the table. I noticed that she placed them on the counter for a moment, her back to me, before bringing them over. At the time, I thought nothing of it. She set 1 bowl in front of me and kept the other for herself. We began to eat, and the soup was delicious, just like Margaret's recipe. Brenda smiled and asked if I liked it. I told her it was perfect. About halfway through the meal, I got up to get some bread from the kitchen. As I stood at the counter slicing a loaf, I happened to glance at the glass door of the cabinet above the sink. The angle was just right, and I could see Brenda's reflection clearly. What I saw made my blood run cold. Brenda was reaching into the pocket of her cardigan. She pulled out a small packet, the kind you might use for sugar or artificial sweetener. But I knew we did not have anything like that in the house. I watched frozen as she opened the packet and sprinkled its contents into my bowl of soup. Then she picked up my spoon and stirred it, dissolving whatever she had added into the broth. For a moment I could not breathe. I could not move. I could not believe what I had just witnessed. My own daughter, the child I had raised with so much love, had just put something in my food. Something she did not want me to know about. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe it was medicine she thought I needed. Maybe it was a vitamin supplement she was trying to give me secretly. But even as I grasped for innocent explanations, I knew the truth. I had been feeling sick for months, ever since Brenda started cooking for me regularly. I had been getting weaker, more confused, more frail, and now I knew why. I forced myself to stay calm. I finished slicing the bread, taking deep breaths, trying to decide what to do. I could confront her right then, demand to know what she had put in my food. But what if she denied it? What if she had more of whatever substance that was? What if confronting her put me in danger? I decided. I needed to be smart about this. I needed proof. When I turned back toward the table, Brenda was looking at her phone, distracted. I walked past her carrying the bread, and as I did, I made my move. In one smooth motion, I switched our bowls. Her soup was now in front of my seat. My soup, the one with the mysterious powder, was now in front of hers. She did not notice. She was too busy scrolling through something on her screen. I sat down and placed a slice of bread beside her bowl, another beside mine. I picked up my spoon and began to eat, my heart pounding so hard I thought she must be able to hear it. But I kept my face neutral, my movements steady. I could not let her know that I had seen. Brenda put down her phone and resumed eating. She took one spoonful, then another, then another. I watched her from the corner of my eye, waiting, wondering what was going to happen. We finished our soup in relative silence. I asked her about Nathan, about their plans for the holidays. She gave vague answers, her attention seeming to drift. I noticed her blinking more than usual, rubbing her eyes as if they were tired. About 20 minutes after we finished eating, Brenda suddenly put her hand to her forehead. She said she did not feel well. Her face had gone pale, and there was a sheen of sweat on her upper lip. I asked her what was wrong, keeping my voice calm and concerned. She said she felt dizzy, nauseous. She said she did not understand she had felt fine all day. I watched her, my heart breaking, even as my suspicions were confirmed. Whatever she had put in my soup was now affecting her. She was experiencing the same symptoms I had been feeling for months, the same symptoms that had made me weak and confused and afraid. Brenda tried to stand, but her legs wobbled, and she had to grab the edge of the table for support. She looked at me, confusion and fear in her eyes. And then she looked at her bowl. Empty. Then at mine. Also empty. And I saw the moment when understanding dawned on her face. She whispered one word. Dad. I nodded slowly. I told her I had seen her. I told her I saw her reflection in the cabinet door. I told her I watched her put something in my soup. And I asked her what she had given me. I asked her what she had been giving me for months. Brenda's face crumpled. She began to cry, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. She kept saying she was sorry, that she did not mean for it to go this far, that Nathan had made her do it. But I needed more than apologies. I needed the truth. And I needed to make sure she got medical attention, before whatever she had taken did serious damage. I pulled out my phone and called 911. I told the dispatcher that my daughter had ingested a dangerous substance and needed immediate medical help. Brenda did not try to stop me. She just sat there crying, her hands shaking in her lap. While we waited for the ambulance, I asked her again what was in that packet. What had she been putting in my food? Through her tears, she told me. It was a sedative, a powerful one that Nathan had obtained somehow. She said they had been giving it to me in small doses for 3 months, trying to make me weak and confused. She said they were planning to increase the dose that night to push my body past its limit. She said they wanted it to look like a heart attack, like natural causes. I felt sick. Not from any poison, but from the realization that my daughter, my Brenda, had been trying to kill me. For money, for an inheritance, for a house and an insurance policy. The ambulance arrived within 15 minutes. The paramedics rushed in, assessed Brenda, and loaded her onto a stretcher. I rode with them to the hospital, holding my daughter's hand, even though I was not sure I would ever be able to forgive her. She was still my child. I still loved her even now. But I also knew that nothing would ever be the same between us. At the hospital, the doctors pumped her stomach and started her on IV fluids. They said she was lucky that if she had taken much more, the outcome could have been very different. A police officer arrived to take my statement, and I told him everything. About the powder in the soup, about the months of feeling unwell, about what Brenda had confessed. They took Brenda into custody that night, right there in her hospital bed. I sat alone in the waiting room for hours, staring at the fluorescent lights, trying to make sense of what had happened. My daughter had tried to murder me. My son-in-law had masterminded the whole thing. Everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie. The investigation that followed was thorough and devastating. Detective Laura Simmons, a no-nonsense woman in her mid-40s, was assigned to the case. She had sharp eyes and a direct manner, and she made it clear from our first meeting that she intended to get to the bottom of what had happened. I cooperated fully. I gave her access to everything: my medical records, my financial documents, my home. I told her about the symptoms I had been experiencing, the questions Brenda and Nathan had asked about my will and insurance policies, the gradual deterioration of my health over the past 3 months. Detective Simmons and her team searched Brenda and Nathan's apartment. What they found was damning. There were multiple bottles of the same sedative that Brenda had used on me, far more than could be explained by any legitimate medical need. There were text messages between Brenda and Nathan, discussing their plan in explicit detail. There were internet searches on Nathan's computer about how to cause death without detection, about the effects of various drugs on elderly patients, about how long it takes for sedatives to leave the body after death. The evidence painted a clear picture. Nathan was the mastermind, the one who had conceived and orchestrated the plot to kill me and inherit my estate. He was the one who had obtained the drugs, who had researched the methods, who had pushed Brenda to carry out the actual poisoning. He was the one with the gambling debts and failed investments that had created the desperate need for money. But Brenda was not innocent. She had gone along with the plan. She had been the one to actually put the poison in my food week after week for 3 months. She had watched me get weaker, watched me suffer, and she had kept going. Whatever pressure Nathan had put on her, she had still made a choice. She had chosen to try to kill her own father. Nathan was arrested at his office the day after I gave my statement. According to Detective Simmons, he had been completely shocked when the police showed up. He had assumed that Brenda would keep her mouth shut, that she would take the fall alone, rather than implicate him. He had underestimated how completely his plan had unraveled. In custody, Nathan tried to blame everything on Brenda. He claimed he had no knowledge of what she was doing, that she had acted alone out of greed and resentment. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. The text messages, the internet searches, the fact that the drugs had been purchased using his credit card. His denials only made him look more guilty. Brenda, for her part, confessed to everything. In her statement to the police, she laid out the entire scheme in detail. Nathan had come to her about a year earlier, desperate and panicked. He had accumulated nearly $300,000 in debt through gambling and bad investments. Creditors were threatening him, and he did not know how to get out. He had looked at Brenda's potential inheritance and seen a solution. All that stood between him and financial salvation was one elderly man, her father, me. According to Brenda, she had initially refused. She told him it was insane that she could never hurt her own father. But Nathan had worn her down over months. He had manipulated her emotionally, threatening to leave her if she did not help him. He had isolated her from friends and family, making himself the center of her world. He had convinced her that what they were doing was not really murder, just helping nature take its course a little faster. None of this excused what Brenda had done. She knew that. But as I read her statement, as I learned the full extent of Nathan's manipulation, I began to understand how my bright, loving daughter had been twisted into someone capable of such horror. I visited Brenda in the hospital before she was transferred to the county jail. She was lying in bed, looking small and broken. Nothing like the confident woman she had been pretending to be during her visits. When she saw me, she started crying again. She asked me how I had known. She asked me how I had figured it out. I told her about the reflection in the cabinet door. I told her that I had almost missed it, that if she had been just a little more careful, I might never have seen. I told her that I had not wanted to believe it even after I saw it, that some part of me had hoped there was an innocent explanation. She asked me if I hated her. I thought about that for a long moment before answering. I told her I did not hate her. I told her I was angry, devastated, betrayed. I told her she had broken my heart in a way I did not think could ever be fully healed. But hate, no. She was still my daughter. I had loved her from the moment she was born, and that love did not just disappear even after what she had done. Then I asked her a question that had been burning in my mind. I asked her if she had thought about her mother, if she had considered what Margaret would say if she could see what Brenda was doing. Brenda's face crumpled at that. She said she had tried not to think about it. She said she knew her mother would be horrified, ashamed. She said she had told herself that it was different because her mother was gone, that the person she was hurting was not really the same father she had grown up with. But that was a lie, she admitted. She had known exactly what she was doing, and she had done it anyway. I left the hospital that day feeling emptier than I had ever felt in my life. Even when Margaret died, I had not felt this level of devastation. Death is natural, inevitable, something we all must face eventually. But betrayal by your own child, there is nothing natural about that. My neighbor Walter came to check on me that evening. He had heard about what happened through the neighborhood grapevine, as these things always get out. He sat with me on the porch, not saying much, just being there. At one point, he told me he was sorry that he had been right. He said he had hoped he was just being a paranoid old man, seeing danger where there was none. I told him his warning had probably saved my life. If he had not planted that seed of doubt, I might never have watched Brenda so carefully. I might never have seen her reflection in that cabinet door. I might be dead right now. Walter just nodded. He stayed until well after dark, and when he finally left, he made me promise to call him if I needed anything. Anything at all. The trial took place 3 months later in the same county courthouse where Margaret and I had once served on a jury together. I remember thinking how strange it was to be back in that building under such different circumstances. Back then, we had been judging strangers. Now, I was here to testify against my own daughter and son-in-law. The courtroom was crowded on the day I took the stand. Local media had picked up the story, and there was a lot of public interest in the case. I tried to ignore the cameras, the reporters, the curious onlookers. I focused on the task at hand. The prosecutor walked me through my testimony step by step. I described my relationship with Brenda, our happy years as a family, the gradual changes after she married Nathan. I talked about Margaret's death, Brenda's renewed interest in my life, the strange symptoms I had been experiencing for months. And then I described that evening in the kitchen, the reflection in the cabinet door, the moment I saw my daughter poison my soup. I kept my voice steady as I spoke, though inside I was falling apart. It is one thing to know something terrible about someone you love. It is another thing entirely to say it out loud, in a room full of strangers, knowing it will help send that person to prison. When I finished my account of that night, the prosecutor asked me what my daughter had said when she realized I had switched the bowls. I told the court exactly what she had told me, that Nathan had orchestrated everything, that she had been pressured and manipulated, that she was sorry. The defense attorney for Nathan tried to discredit me on cross-examination. He suggested I was an unreliable witness, that my age and the stress of my wife's death had affected my judgment. He implied that I had misunderstood what I saw, that the powder might have been something innocent like medicine or seasoning. I looked him directly in the eyes and told him that I knew what I saw. I told him that my daughter had confessed to everything. I told him that I had been poisoned for 3 months, that my health had deteriorated dramatically, and that the only explanation was the one that Brenda herself had provided. The prosecutor then presented the physical evidence, the packets of sedative found in Brenda and Nathan's apartment, the text messages planning my death, the internet searches about how to kill without detection. It was overwhelming, irrefutable. By the time the prosecution rested its case, there was no doubt in anyone's mind about what had happened. Nathan took the stand in his own defense, still trying to blame everything on Brenda. He claimed she had become obsessed with her inheritance after her mother's death, that she had conceived the plan on her own and carried it out without his knowledge. He said the text messages had been jokes taken out of context. He said the internet searches were for a novel he was thinking of writing. No one believed him. The jury could see through his lies just as I could. When the prosecutor confronted him with the credit card records showing he had purchased the sedatives, Nathan had no explanation. His facade of confidence cracked, and for a moment I saw the real man underneath. Desperate, selfish, and utterly without conscience. Brenda did not testify. Her lawyer advised against it, saying that her confession to the police was already damaging enough. Instead, he argued for leniency, presenting evidence of Nathan's manipulation and control over his client. He called a psychologist who testified about coercive control, about how abusers can twist their victims into doing terrible things. He portrayed Brenda as both perpetrator and victim. I did not know what to think about that. On one hand, I had seen the evidence of Nathan's influence over my daughter. On the other hand, Brenda was a grown woman who had made her own choices. She could have said no. She could have come to me, told me what Nathan was planning, asked for help. Instead, she had poisoned me week after week, watching me suffer, doing nothing to stop it. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned with their verdict, the courtroom fell silent. Nathan was found guilty of attempted murder in the 1st degree. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in prison with no possibility of parole for at least 15 years. He showed no emotion as the sentence was read, just stared straight ahead with that cold expression I had always found so unsettling. Brenda was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. The jury had accepted the argument that she had been under Nathan's influence, which resulted in a lesser charge. The judge sentenced her to 8 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 5 years for good behavior. When the sentence was announced, Brenda finally looked at me. Her eyes were red from crying, her face pale and drawn. She did not say anything. She did not need to. I could see everything in her expression: regret, shame, fear, and somewhere beneath it all, the faint hope that maybe someday I might be able to forgive her. I did not react. I just sat there watching as the bailiffs led my daughter away in handcuffs. The woman who had been my baby girl, my pride and joy, the center of my world for 34 years. Gone. Not dead, but lost to me in a way that felt almost worse. Outside the courthouse, reporters tried to get a statement from me. I pushed past them without a word. Walter was waiting by my truck, ready to drive me home. I climbed into the passenger seat and stared out the window as we pulled away from that terrible place. Walter asked if I was okay. I told him I did not know. I told him I might never know. The months after the trial were the hardest of my life. I had survived a murder attempt, sent my daughter to prison, and exposed a conspiracy that had nearly cost me everything. But victory, if you could call it that, felt hollow. I had won, but at what cost? For the first few weeks, I barely left the house. I sat in Margaret's old chair looking at photographs, trying to figure out where things had gone wrong. Had I been a bad father? Had I missed warning signs? Was there something I could have done differently that would have prevented all of this? Walter refused to let me wallow for too long. He came over every day sometimes just to sit with me, sometimes to drag me out for a walk or a meal at the local diner. He reminded me that I had survived, that I still had years of life ahead of me, that I could not let what happened define the rest of my days. Slowly, I started to listen. I began with small steps. I cleaned the house, really cleaned it, getting rid of clutter that had accumulated since Margaret's death. I returned to my workshop, picking up tools I had not touched in months. The familiar smell of sawdust and varnish was comforting, a reminder of who I was before all of this happened. I also made some important decisions about my future. I met with my lawyer, Samuel Green, and rewrote my will from scratch. Brenda was no longer named as a beneficiary. Instead, I left instructions for the house to be sold after my death, with the proceeds going to a local charity that supports victims of domestic violence and elder abuse. The money from my savings and life insurance would go to educational foundations in the area, helping young people get the opportunities they deserved. Samuel asked me if I was sure about removing Brenda from the will entirely. I told him I was. I told him I did not make this decision out of anger or revenge. I made it because I could not reward the behavior that had almost killed me. If Brenda truly changed, truly became a better person, she would understand. And if she did not change, then she did not deserve an inheritance anyway. I also started volunteering with a support group for elderly people who had experienced abuse or exploitation by family members. It was a small group meeting weekly at the community center, but the connections I made there were profound. I discovered I was not alone in my experience. There were others who had been betrayed by children, grandchildren, even spouses. Hearing their stories, sharing my own, helped me process what had happened in ways that solitary reflection never could. Through the support group, I met people who became genuine friends. We would get together outside of meetings for dinners, for card games, for fishing trips. For the first time since Margaret's death, I felt like I was part of a community again. I was not just surviving. I was living. About 6 months after the trial, I received a letter from Brenda. It was handwritten, several pages long, and I could tell she had spent a long time on it. She talked about her life in prison, about the therapy sessions she was attending, about the hard work she was doing to understand how she had become capable of such terrible things. She did not ask for money or early release. She did not make excuses for what she had done. She simply said she was sorry. Truly sorry, and that she hoped someday I might be able to forgive her. She said she understood if I never wanted to see her again, but that she would always love me, and that she thought about me every day. I read that letter many times over the following weeks. I was not ready to respond. Not yet. The wound was still too fresh, the betrayal too profound. But I kept the letter tucked away in a drawer because some part of me wanted to believe that reconciliation might be possible someday. Walter asked me once if I was ever going to visit Brenda in prison. I told him I did not know. I told him I needed more time. He nodded and said that was fair. He said forgiveness was a journey, not a destination. He said I would know when I was ready if that day ever came. 2 months later, I drove to the prison. I had not told anyone I was going, not even Walter. I needed to do this on my own terms, without anyone else's expectations or opinions. The visiting room was stark and depressing, with plastic chairs and tables bolted to the floor. I sat and waited, my heart pounding, until a guard brought Brenda in. She looked different. Thinner, paler, older than her 34 years. Prison had not been kind to her, and I felt a pang of something that might have been pity. But there was also something else in her eyes, something I had not seen in a long time. Clarity, humility, genuine remorse. She sat down across from me, her hands folded on the table. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she thanked me for coming. She said she had not expected, it had not dared to hope I would ever want to see her again. I told her I was not sure why I had come. I told her I was still angry, still hurt, still struggling to understand how my daughter could have done what she did. But I also told her that I had received her letter and that I could see she was trying to change. She started to cry, then quietly, without making a scene. She told me about the counseling she was receiving, about the programs she was participating in. She told me about the other women in her unit, some of whom had also been manipulated by abusive partners into committing crimes. She told me she was starting to understand how Nathan had controlled her, isolated her, twisted her thinking until wrong seemed right. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I asked her one question. I asked her what she wanted from me. She shook her head. She said she did not want anything. She said she did not deserve anything. She said she just wanted me to know that she was sorry, that she was working to become a better person, and that whatever happened between us was up to me. She would accept whatever I decided. I sat with that for a moment. Then I told her what I had decided about the will. I told her she was no longer a beneficiary, that my estate would go to charity after I died. I told her this was not about punishment, but about consequences, about the fact that actions have repercussions. She nodded slowly. She said she understood. She said she did not deserve an inheritance after what she had done. Then I told her something else. I told her that I was willing to give her a second chance, but it had to be earned. I told her that if she completed her sentence, stayed out of trouble, continued her therapy, and demonstrated genuine change, I would help her rebuild her life when she got out, not with money handed over freely, but with support, guidance, and the opportunity to prove herself. I told her I was not doing this because I had forgiven her. I was not sure I ever could. But I was doing it because she was still my daughter, because I still remembered the little girl who used to help her mother make chicken soup on Sunday afternoons. That girl was still in there somewhere, buried under years of bad choices and toxic influences. And if there was any chance of reaching her, I had to try. Brenda cried harder at that. She reached across the table and took my hand, and I let her. We sat like that for several minutes, Father and daughter connected by something that even attempted murder could not entirely destroy. Before I left, I told her one more thing. I told her that her mother would have wanted me to give her this chance. Margaret had always believed in redemption, in the possibility of change. If she were still alive, she would have been devastated by what Brenda had done, but she also would have held out hope for her daughter's soul. Brenda promised me she would not waste this chance. She promised she would make me proud, even if it took the rest of her life. I drove home with a strange feeling in my chest. Not peace exactly, but something close to it. I had done what I could. The rest was up to Brenda. It has been a year now since that visit to the prison. A year since I confronted the darkest chapter of my life and found a way to move forward. I am 60 years old now. My health has fully recovered from the months of poisoning, though the doctors say I should continue monitoring for any long-term effects. I wake up each morning grateful to be alive, grateful for the second chance I almost did not get. My workshop is busy again. Word has spread about what happened to me, and many people in the community have reached out with support and new orders for custom furniture. I spend my days doing what I love, creating beautiful things from raw wood, finding meaning in the work of my hands. Walter and I have become even closer friends. We play chess on Tuesday evenings and go fishing on Saturday mornings. He has introduced me to his other buddies, a group of retired men who gather at the diner every Wednesday for breakfast and conversation. They have accepted me as one of their own, and their friendship has been a healing balm for my wounded spirit. The support group I joined has become an important part of my life. I have transitioned from participant to mentor, helping others who are going through what I experienced. There is something powerful about turning your pain into purpose, about using the worst thing that ever happened to you to help others avoid the same fate. Brenda continues to write me letters from prison. She tells me about her progress, her setbacks, her hopes for the future. She is scheduled for a parole hearing in 3 years, and she is determined to show the board that she has changed. I believe her, or at least I want to believe her. Time will tell. Nathan is still serving his sentence, and I have heard nothing from him. I do not expect to. Whatever connection we might have had, as in laws, was severed completely by his actions. He is nothing to me now, just a cautionary tale about the dangers of greed and manipulation. I think about Margaret often, especially on Sunday afternoons, when I find myself craving her chicken soup. I have tried to make it myself a few times following her recipe as best I can remember. It never tastes quite right, but the act of making it connects me to her memory in a way that brings comfort rather than pain. Sometimes when I am sitting on the porch watching the sunset, I talk to her. I tell her about my day, about the furniture I am working on, about the friends I have made. I tell her about Brenda, about the prison visits, about my hopes that our daughter might yet find her way back to the person she was meant to be. I like to think Margaret hears me wherever she is. I like to think she is proud of how I handled everything, proud that I found a way to survive not just the poison, but the betrayal. Proud that I chose compassion over bitterness, hope over despair. The night I switched those plates, I did more than save my own life. I took back control of my story. I refused to be a victim, refused to let my daughter's betrayal define me. I made a choice to fight to survive, to rebuild. And in the end, that choice made all the difference. I used to think that family meant unconditional trust. I used to believe that the people who shared your blood could never truly hurt you. I know better now. Family is complicated. Love is complicated. People are capable of both beautiful and terrible things, sometimes at the same time. But I also know this. Forgiveness is not about excusing what someone did. It is about freeing yourself from the weight of carrying that hurt forever. It is about choosing peace over poison in every sense of the word. That night in my kitchen, I did not just switch 2 plates. I switched my understanding of what it means to be a father, what it means to love someone who has wronged you, what it means to survive when everything falls apart. Sometimes protecting yourself is not selfish. It is the only way to live long enough to give second chances, and second chances, I have learned, are worth fighting for. If you have made it this far, I want to thank you for listening to my story. It was not easy to tell, and I imagine it was not easy to hear, but I hope it has given you something to think about. I hope it has reminded you to trust your instincts, to pay attention to the people around you, to never take your safety for granted. Have you ever had to confront a painful truth about someone you loved? Have you ever found the strength to forgive someone who hurt you deeply? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories matter just as much as mine. If this video resonated with you, please take a moment to hit that like button. It helps more people find this story and maybe learn from what I went through. And if you are not already subscribed to this channel, I hope you will consider joining our community. We share stories of survival resilience and hope, and your support means the world to us. Please share this video with someone who might need to hear it. You never know who in your life might be going through something similar, who might benefit from knowing they are not alone. Thank you again for being here. I wish you peace. I wish you wisdom. And most of all, I wish you the courage to face whatever challenges life throws your way. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Until next time.